You're on. Business is on. Let's record. Somnambulism. Let's see. We are working on the question of urban reconstruction of bombed city, the Second World War, and kind of a reconstruction of a life world that was stopped and was needed to continue. And I would say that a lot of our practices are dealing with historical continuity, basically. And a lot of organizations and a lot of states are concerned with historical continuity. It's extremely important. I'd like to open up my personal criticism on a particular kind of fiction that deals with time travel. I realized recently some cultures are not producing time travel fictions, and some do very heavily and constantly, and very also in a very rich manner. Also, they have their own history of time traveling science fiction. I don't know your kind of position on the question of time travel, but the first thing I realized is that the first distinction is between secular context of imagination and non-secular ones, because it seems like science fiction is by category secular. It comes from a secular context of invention. So it's not by accident that, for example, a country I grew up, Iran, the idea of science fiction as the same way applies to the West doesn't apply, because people already believe in other temporalities. What does it mean to have like science fiction if you think that beyond the world there is another dimension where a creature with 2,000 hands, which each hand has 2,000 fingers, and each finger has 2,000 fingers, is counting your deeds in your life. This person is already in a hallucinated plenitude, is dealing with a kind of a unreal reality. So you see, certain cultures are enchanted. So it's a very different kind of relationship to idea of fiction. So this is also one of the things I realized because of changing my context of knowledge. I studied in Iran, and I studied in Germany, and I studied also in Belgium, and now I'm studying in Lithuania. And kind of, I've become, because of that movement, I've become a little bit sensitive and oversensitive sometimes to what happens when you change your context of knowing. Ways of knowing are not the same in places. One of the achievements of Europe has been to bring the context of knowing of different European countries as much as possible close to each other. So you don't have an epistemological shock when you go from Germany to French. You see the same science, same kind of urban logic going on, you see. But if you go from like Germany or France to like, I don't know, let's say west, south of Iran, in the border with like Pakistan, there you have to deal with a totally radically different cosmology. I've been kind of in the last 3 years in my kind of residency in Lithuania, I've been constantly talking about this basically. What happens between this context of knowledge? And I've been like insisting to my friends that we have to go as fast as possible from ecology to cosmology, okay? Because cosmology suddenly it becomes much larger than ecology and might include all sorts of actor agency and like dimensions that are necessary for ongoingness of a lot of people's life. And this has kind of also blew my mind because I became interested in cosmology. I wasn't. And I'm also a child of enlightenment. When Da Vinci drew the perfect man on his circles, it was also my picture. I assume it's also yours. So Iran is also totally a modernized, kind of fast-forward, capitalist, bureaucratic direction. Yes, it's a kind of a chimera between like a little bit of more traditional way of organizing life and afterlife. By the way, they're very busy. If you want to understand the Iranian government, let's start a study group. I want to really have like an anthropology of Iranian government. Nobody knows how they think. Doesn't make sense psychologically, politically, economically. Even you cannot understand if you think in terms of mafia, doesn't make sense. So as if there are sometimes agents of chaos and disorder, also well-being and care. So there are both of them, so very ambiguous. But it seems that West Asia is all about that ambiguity, the ebb and flow of different forces. Beinon Nahrain, or what is it called in English? The cradle of life, where the Mesopotamia, or in Farsi we call it Mian Rudan, was literally a geographical area between two rivers. And if you know how rivers are, they are moving, they are not static. So you're dealing with a riverine life, a life next to a river. And these people are the ones who invented wheels. So as you can see, these people have a totally different cosmology from the ones that might live in the mountain. But that's totally not my business, and I'm also not, I have no idea about that kind of like a ethological study on people's like relation with the environment. But nevertheless, I will use that kind of, I will bring a footnote to that, the idea of affordance. Do you know, it's a kind of a popular term in a lot of discussions these days. Do you know what is affordance in English? Maybe like affording basically means when something, I don't know, for example, my left hand is really afforded by my right hand because it really fits, or I don't know, this microphone is afforded by my voice, my sound, because it's designed based on this. So it turns out that a lot of body deformation in the natural world, also human world, has a relationship with its environment based on affordance. That means it's a proposition not by me, by others, that the animal body is the reverse of its environment. You see? So it's a very different idea of saying that Darwinian-like evolutionary, laddery kind of way of evolving into particular bodies because of competition and like sex and all of these things. But the environment was very involved in the shaping of animals. Particularly mammals, which we are shaped by ice. This body is coming through 3 ice ages, especially the last one, which lasted centuries. We kind of, our sensory kind of perceptual bodily engagement with the environment, I would say, kind of is coming through that time. So we are very icy, actually. Also, not only us, also a lot of animals, because the last ice age kind of killed 98% of all living creatures who had a vertebra. By the way, there were also other beings, but it seems like a lot of us are interested in vertebrae because that's kind of an animality that we can relate to. We cannot really identify with bacteria or other things. But anyway, what was I talking about? Why did I talk about Ice Age? The context, the context of the thing and the ecology of imagination, going from to cosmology and this kind of things. Yeah. So hi, my name is Sina. Welcome to this old wall. we are inside a wall, an old defensive wall, which is not needed because there are other modes of defense. The three little pigs who originally invented architecture at the dawn of time, they are the ones who come up with better engineering like walls. And of course for them, the wolf who wanted to get into that house was kind of an excuse to come up with very nice designs, but we actually don't know what the wolf wanted, because according to the story, everything that the wolf said, he just knocked on the door and said, "Let me come in." But he didn't know what the wolf wanted. He just wanted to come and read with you. I don't know. It was not necessarily I want to eat you. But at the end, the wolf came through the chimney, as you know the three little pigs, a little bit to come to the chimney, and the pigs have prepared like a soup, boiling kind of water, and the wolf is cooked basically and devoured. Yes, eat your enemy. That's great. So anyway, so eventually the three little pigs got very much more advanced, and they kind of invented more layers of surveillance and architecture and kind of a city based on what's going on and what's happening where, and not only defending but also predicting. So the kind of a predictive engineering was invented that kind of was based on the idea that what could happen next year in 1,000 years, kind of that idea. So we are now dealing with a fully utopian, technologically advanced super space station run by pigs. And now the problem is that how do we reconstruct the wolf? Because the wolf is gone, is a forgotten monster, is out, even hard to find in the archives of the wolf, of the pigs, sorry. So the pigs have to kind of dealing with a remembering of what was a wolf once was. And everything depends on the way we remember. According to this space, everything has to be remembered. For example, this design of this beautiful curve, these are all what I call them mnemonic devices. Mnemonia in English, very weird term. M starts with M, but N basically comes from the word memory. It's a device that helps you to remember. Okay, it's a very Heidegger, by the way, was obsessed with this kind of stuff. So he kind of used a very precise and beautiful German language, and he differentiated two kind of memories: the Gedächtnis and Erinnerung. Anybody is into German here? By the way, no? Okay, doesn't matter. So Erinnerung is kind of an internalized memory. You know, you kind of come from the body and you know it by heart when something comes to mind, and it's organic, you know. Gedächtnis, on the other hand, is technological. It's a technologized kind of mind that is reminded. It has to be prompt, you know. So you put something on your phone as kind of remembering it. You build a monument to kind of remember. This is Gedächtnis, by the way. This is not Erinnerung, while we are in. If it was Erinnerung, they wouldn't have to build this actually. You would have already had it. It has to be here. Erinnerung is here, basically. It's the same problem that Hamlet had when he dealt with the ghost of his father. You remember the Hamlet Shakespeare's play when I'm really sad for Hamlet, by the way, because he is this really teenager beginning to fall in love with this gorgeous girl, learning to play sword, and kind of very bright young man, and suddenly the father is mysteriously killed. Until that is fine. We could deal with the process of trauma and mourning. He could have been okay, but the problem is that the father comes back and kind of comes back, and not from kind of the afterlife, comes from hell. He's in hell, burning agony. And I really love it when he comes to the Hamlet the first time, he said that, I don't remember the expression, but yes, son, if I tell you what's happening in hell, you will be, I don't know, it will make your hair grow. What is the term he uses? Anybody is a Hamlet expert? I don't remember. It would give you, what is this called when your hair grow on your hand? Goosebumps, yeah. I'm not sure actually he says that, but he's kind of quite horrifying figure. Anyway, so the father of Hamlet is an example of the Gedächtnis, and he comes from the hell and asks Hamlet as a kind of a ghost, and he offers Hamlet his heritage. That kind of that your ancestors supposed to give you. And what is the heritage? A task, a revenge. So totally horrible kind of inheritance. And Hamlet work with his heritage is absolutely catastrophic. He brings the whole house down. He make himself kill. And sadly, Ophelia is the name Ophelia, the girl, or am I making a mistake? From another place. Ophelia, yeah, okay. So Ophelia, he brings Ophelia to madness, and she kind of kills himself. But I would say that Ophelia had a lot of potential. She didn't jump in the river because of Hamlet. It's Shakespeare's fault. Through the process of Hamlet kind of rejecting Ophelia becomes a poet. She has this beautiful, I call it word salad. She enters into a state of intoxication and half dead, half alive, and reaches very kind of advanced levels of literature. And I had no reason to kill her if I was a playwriter. I don't know why Shakespeare get rid of her, by the way. To listen to the Hamlet play, maybe, I don't know. But I would like to kind of start a study of Ophelia's kind of salad that she gets into. Jung really loved Ophelia. It was his love, by the way. But that's another story. So the father. So we have the father. You know the poster. America wants you. That's the kind of thing we're dealing with here. And Hamlet, in the first encounter, does exactly what you do with Gedächtnis. He takes his notebook and takes a note. Revenge, father. He does that actually. If you remember the play, he takes a note from his dead father out from the depth of the hell coming. I would call that totally catastrophic. That's the first. That's already a catastrophic thing that he does. He is not dealing with Erinnerung. He doesn't embody the revenge. You see, he notes it down and it becomes something has to be prompt. And exactly according to Shakespeare, that's the whole beginning of the tragedy or madness of the Hamlet, that kind of stuff. The failure to internalize memory. In this case, a very kind of a heritage. That's also a way for me to understand what is heritage. That is exactly heritage. Something you didn't ask for. Something that you don't want. Something that's also totally, you have no idea how to deal with it. Heritage sometimes comes as a form of a vengeful father from hell, who's kind of obliging you into some sort of process that you might or might not fail. I would say, by the way, we can do better than Hamlet. I was thinking, how would I do that? I don't know yet. I think Hamlet is not our best model for receiving heritage. I'd like to propose tonight, if you stay for me for the next 3 hours, I will give you 3 other models, which will be very interesting. And if you leave for even 1 minute, you won't understand anything that I will say. I'm joking, you can go actually, it's fine. So the Hamlet and the ghost father, there's another ghost that you might also be inhabited, possessed by as your kind of ancestor kind of thing that obliges you to some sort of work to be done. It's also a ghost. I call it poltergeist. You know the poltergeist, the category of spirits? Yeah, kind of. Actually, there are like a lot of films about it, which I like to. There's a new one, very scary film, 2019, I think, Poltergeist. So Poltergeist is it doesn't have a direct intention and intensity of the Hamlet father with his finger pointing at you like, I don't want you, I don't want you, I want you. You know, that kind of thing. Poltergeist is a mess. It's also a spirit of the kitchen. Takes out the drawers, throw out the fork and plates in the air, things break down, things fall down. So it's a kind of a noise agent of noise, but not because of intention, because poltergeist doesn't understand the relations that it's into, that is inside. So it's kind of a confused, I'm not sure, maybe it's confused or maybe it's kind of that's how kind of a good ghosts are. Some of us have ancestors like that, totally like poltergeistish, and some of us have also like that Hamlet's father kind of ghost. So I wonder why people go crazy, rage war, and like go into like people's towers and things like that. The force of heritage can be very powerful. Before giving my two other spirits, I give you a fable that would elucidate the notion of heritage, which I like to really like a lot maneuver because it's really helpful for me as an artist. How do I deal with world, with material, with stuff? By the way, I'm a painter, and I studied basically painting. It was my way becoming a painter many years ago. I love painting and drawing. It's kind of my thing. So I'm kind of crazy about lines and drawings and this kind of stuff. But I will also later tell you a story how did I develop from abstract painting. I went back into a form that I call Baroque. I will come back to Baroque, it's very kind of important for me. So back to the fable. By the way, everything I say tonight is basically fable. And fables or parables, they can be completely bullshit. So you have to be very careful about that. In the whole, I would say the whole like map or the whole mess of knowledge or style of knowing that humans are creating, there's a very, very, very tiny bits of it that what we call science. So a lot of people are criticizing science because of its kind of asshole authority over our life. But when you look at the human existence, science doesn't really have that much power. Most of it is also coming from other ways of knowing, according to my experience, especially in Europe, I would say. So I would say that the kind of authority on knowing that the sciences produces is very, very minimal and small, so there's no danger about science, we don't have to worry about it. And there's also all sorts of other things. But when and why one uses fables. You know fable or fable, I don't know how to... What is the difference between a parable and a fable, by the way? I think fables are more like animal or something like that. But parable is like any kind of short and really graspable story that puts your mind in direction. So I would say that like fables and parables, they are orientational tools. They might come super like ethical, like teaching you ethics, like by bad examples. By the way, they're all about a bad example. Don't be like the fox who did this. Don't be that monkey who was sitting on a branch and cutting his tree and the fall down. Don't be like the scorpion who wanted to cross a river and was sitting on the back of a frog, and the frog mistake was to trust the scorpion, because the scorpion does what all scorpion does, stings the head of the frog. You know, that kind of a orientational tool. And orientation is everything, you know. A lot of stories, they're just tools for orientation. It doesn't tell you where to go, it just puts you in the right direction. And it could be a minimum, like a little half a degree to the left, what it does. So the parable that I wanted to share with you is called the parable of the 12th, how do you say 12th camel? The 12th. If you're on the wall, because this time I didn't hear it. Also, yeah, I didn't even hear it at all last. I'll try to. Let me come in. Let me come in. That's what the wolf says. Let's start it from the beginning. I want to see it. I'll ask it. Okay. Let me come in, or let me come in. That's what the wolf said to the three little pigs knocking at the door. My sister was very good at performing this. It's really scared me as a child. I had an older sister, and I would hide in the closet, and she would just knock on the door and said, in Farsi, she would say very scary tone, let me come in. It was very nice. Actually, in the story of the three little pigs, when the wolf knocks at the door at their house and asks, let me come in, we don't know what he wants. He might not want to eat them. All he expresses is the desire to enter. So he might be on a totally different idea or misunderstanding about the whole project. So, metaphysics of architecture unleashed in the story of the three little pigs, the origin of architecture, the master labyrinth builders' invention of the wall in the beginning of the time by the pigs. The wolf, we don't know. The wolf's still a little bit cool because the wolf stands for a kind of a raw, unruly nature that's kind of changes landscapes, and wolves were kind of hated in the Middle Ages. So a new contemporary modern person would love the wolf as that kind of transition from like pre-modern to modernity. We are not only afraid of the monsters, but we also like them. And it's not by accident that the 21st century is the time of the marginal creatures. If you follow a lot of thinkers of the 21st century, they place the potential in the figure of the marginal creature, the monster, the schizophrenic, the mad, the nomad, the Deleuze, etc. Foucault would put potential on the body of the madman, and etc. and etc. And one of the most famous locations of potentiality in 21st century is Parasite, which the Three Little Pigs, which is an older regime of defensive mechanism, didn't like at all. So with them, we are kind of dealing with the architecture of demarcation, creating barriers and kind of creating surveillance systems. And also we are dealing with construction of the wall. And one of the experts, masters of kind of thinkers about the wall, if not anybody else, is Kafka, I would say. First, the pigs are for me very good wall thinkers. But we don't like anymore. Now we're also living in this world of like boundary crossing and like visa applications and this kind of things. So it's kind of, the walls are not 100% like material, and like it's hard to just blow it and would come down. No, they are very complicated and they are, I would say, porous. Things come and go through. And some people might say that the origin of life was exactly because of the first organism who constructed a wall. So the interior of the cell could hold itself, and the membrane of the cell were exactly because of that separate itself from the environment. It was porous. Things would come and go. There was negotiation between the inside of the cell and outside of the cell. So this membrane was very like this, not a space of like, was not a death zone, but exactly where all sort of transactions would actually happen. So the wall was very much, let's call it membrane, was very much a space where life would flourish, where two different kind of energies would meet and a lot of interesting things would happen there. Not like this wall that we are inside, which is now a museum by the way, but if we go back to a kind of its original use, if it was ever one, was kind of a death zone. You could hang people there who try to getting the enemy or the wolf, we don't know. But anyway, Kafka, I would say, was one of the people who really kind of recognized what is the meaning of a wall in like modern post, like almost like industrial societies. And he kind of, as an artist of the law, also a lawyer by education, he knew how to see the wall and how it kind of operated as a really foundational civilizational architecture. So in many of his parables, Kafka, by the way, Kafka calls his own story parables, and by definition, all parables can be 100% totally bullshit. So we know that and we're okay with it, and that's how we read them, to kind of let that kind of parable or kind of lure or trap take us in. Because it seems like the parables are exactly like those kind of structures that you can't really prove your point, but you feel the effects of it so much that you condense it into a metaphor or a parable or a fable, and that thing can distance itself from you, and it's very contagious. Other people take it and it has its own life, and it evolves in history. People use it and it grows by itself. People get attached to it. I come back to the lore, but let's complete my kind of footnote on Kafka. I'm not quite a Kafka lover. I really liked him before, but I kind of entered into a kind of a more socially progressive mode of politics. I would say Kafka's relationship to politics is quite like crazy, and he saw the system or the law as unknowable and sadistic. In this beautiful story, when somebody comes from the village, do you know the story of Kafka called "Before the Law"? You have this very nice short story. The story begins with somebody from the village come to the town and wants to see the law, and enters the gate and asks the doorman, "Can I see the law?" And guess what? Totally, this is by definition Kafkaesque, by the way. Guess what the doorman says? Please wait. Not today. Could you wait, please? And of course, Kafkaesque is like that, is which infinitely continues itself. The guy waits all his life behind the door, kind of thing. It's a very nice ending, by the way, the story. Please read it at your own time. The ending is even more horrible than what I already established. So Kafka as a kind of lover and thinker and kind of totally being tormented and by new demarcations or spaces that would cut the subject, cut the person, but not only walls that would like hold or protect or defend the subjects, but cut through them. In another one of my favorite stories of Kafka is about the news of a wall. It's said that the emperor is building the biggest, longest wall around the empire, and the news of this construction travels through the whole kingdom and goes through the body of a fisherman who is just living in the nowhere in the middle of the kingdom, doesn't have a business. And the story is told by the child of that fisherman. And he, as a child, registered the force of the news of the wall inside his father's body, something that you will never see. The wall is somewhere out there, actually you have no idea of it. It's a very, I still like, I'm caught in the parable that Kafka produced about the sheer force of what the wall does. Very complicated. So in this case, the wall is not like a container that holds the space, but it's like a bullet. It goes through the space. It's not like a gas that would fill the space, but it's totally different velocity and kind of vector activity. Kafka is a master of this kind of transformation, and he knew which medium to use. Parables are awesome. You cannot prove them, but they are kind of worked away, and there are old probably fables, which are more like an older genre of parables, I would say, where basically thinking activated by animals. Some people suggest that the origin of metaphors were actually like animals who would suggest things to the hunter, gatherer, whatever people were those times. I come back to it. What does it mean when a mind is activated by beasts? I will talk about it later today. But why are we interested in Kafka and kind of how do we approach a system from outside? If by accident you are a wolf in the story of the Three Little Pigs, how do you apply entrance, submit yourself to that structure? Maybe Wolf could have kind of called first instead of coming and knocking, would have maybe had a bit better destiny for him. But to depart from that, I would come back to the idea of the parables as lures, or as, you know the word in English, lure, kind of, when you're lured into something, when something like catches your imagination so hard you cannot get rid of it. Or trap could be also another word for it, when things are trapped. Who are the masters of lures and traps? Hunters, the ones who make traps. If you go to a fisherman's shop, you see all sorts of little traps that you could go fishing with them. You put them at the end of your fishing. What's it called? The fishing thing? The fishing what? Rod. Fishing rod, great, yes. So kind of you attach it to this kind of thing, and you see that for every different fish, there is a particular lure. What that fish might have seen as tasty. So as you can see, the fisherman or the hunter, in this case with the sea, is in a perspectival game. Is engaging what would the animal might have been seeing. A very particular problem that I would say this kind of people who were living at the border when water meets the land were busy with. a change of a play of perspective. And the people who build traps, they know the perspectival game very well, and they're kind of very, very good at it, very, very awesome, and we are jealous about them. And also they're cool because it's from the past. We have now fishing industry. I don't know, a few years ago I was in Norway, and do you know how fishing is done from your laptop at home? There's a kind of a robot in the north that gathers fish around kind of a circle. Those robotic hands, they feed them and kind of take them. So there is no idea of that kind of stuff anymore. So it's highly computerized and kind of industrial kind of thing. It has its own problem and interest. I don't want to open a critique on industrialism. I did that yesterday, but today is more about lures and fishes and a totally different way of life that emerges when two mediums meet each other. Mountain, the earth, the sea, and the land, this kind of stuff. And at those membrane, at those kind of wall, let's say when two environments are meeting, was exactly the place where humans kind of engaged with animals, some might say. As I was saying, the Ice Age totally changed the whole scenery. It was a different story. When the Ice Age came, we were not dealing again with the water, although we might have, because still life was lurking a lot between the cracks and the ice and the slowly melting, which took hundreds of years. But that's another story. I will come back to it later. But so between these kind of spaces, when lures and traps were made, and kind of people engaged in perspectives of the animal. Lures, I would say, now we use them a lot, not in fishing, but in storytelling. One of the, I would say, the biggest human industry right now is storytelling. Massive, most expensive, advanced industrially. A lot of people like money in and like money out. There's so much into it, very complicated. And one of the industries of storytelling that me, by myself, by nature and education, have allergic reaction to, and I'm supposed to hate it very much, is the Hollywood, of course. We're very good at mixing, by the way. Hollywood is a mixing agent, like capitalism itself, to produce hybrids. They're very good at hybridizing, and I'm always like blown away by putting things together that I didn't know was possible. So historical fictioning is being used by Hollywood storytelling years now. They have advanced it very like a weird direction, and you don't even feel what's happening. For example, I recently see a TV series which could have been my research, basically turned into like a series. It's called The Terror. Do you know it? Have you seen The Terror? But great, it's not bad. Check it out. It's basically my research on medieval bestiaries. If I had applied at Netflix that script and wrote it and made it, this would have been totally my kind of work. So it's a story of a kind of imperial like journey through the North Pole, kind of a shipwreck and the ice of the north, and in the noble British men who are on this journey trying to make a shortcut into the east, they end up being stranded for months in ice and dealing with a particular mythical creature of the north. And the whole story is, of course, it's a horror story, but it's a particular medieval kind of horror story, which the evil is embodied. You see, it's a very different kind of genre. By the way, welcome to this talk, where this lecture is about evil. My name is Sina. Welcome. Nice to see you. In the next 2 hours, I will talk about evil, and I would say every artist at some point has to take a position regarding evil. Is there evil in real? Some people would not. it seems like there is a whole shift in the apparatuses of storytelling from evil as corporal and entity to power struggle. As I give you an example, Shakespeare, for example, I know Richard III, is this the crippled person is it the Richard III, that the kind of the tragic evil guy? So for example, in his character, Maleficent is corporal, you see? You can see in his body that he's bad and he's kind of physically horrible, monstrous. Another example, which is one of my favorite evil characters, is Ursula in Little Mermaid. Have you seen Little Mermaid, Walt Disney? Please, no? You haven't? Yes, thank you. Right. It's great. By the way, Little Mermaid is the beginning of the golden age of Walt Disney. From Cinderella to Little Mermaid is a massive kind of shift. By the way, I'm going to come back to it. So, Ursula in The Little Mermaid is evil corporal, no? Kind of makeup, octopus, and like evil laughter, which is great. And kind of her kind of evilness comes from her stomach. You know, when she laughs in the story, it's a kind of a joy that Ursula has from the depth of her belly. So what makes her laugh is the idea of corrupting the fish who wants to be human. And she's like, yes, I can do it for you, and I can do more, and yes, you can do more. And the stories, I really like it, by the way. Little Mermaid, hair is great as well. I decided as a child, great songs. I don't know why people like Frozen. I hate Frozen. I don't know why people, I don't understand. Somebody could please explain to me why people watch Frozen. Horrible, the songs are bad, the characters don't make sense. Anyway, so as you can see, that there's the shift from the newer, for example, let's say with the Disney enterprise. As you can see, check out the last 4 movies of Disney. The evil is not corporal anymore. Actually, there is no evil anymore. There is only historical misunderstanding and power struggle. The evil is not embodied anymore. Another example I give you from like Shakespeare to our modern time. Let's take example of another TV series, American. I'm really apologizing for it. This kind of references, House of Cards. The evil is purely political, power struggle. Nobody's physically kind of bad, that kind of thing. There is no evil. It's just human greed or whatever that's coming into power. So the power struggle is the modern replacement of a pre-modern notion of evil, which was corporal. Why corporal evil is interesting? I don't know, it's just interesting, it's very cool. I think that's a lot of potential. When evil is corporal, it kind of also brings us back, brings me back at least to a kind of to a sensibility, to a radically changing, shifting context of relating to badness or malevolence in this world. And it's actually very interesting to see that. What I am working on in my own research is what I call evil perception. I came to it from thinking a lot about rhetorics and what does it mean to create rhetorical devices that tell a story and lure people, and how do I myself let myself be captured by somebody else's trap and lures. Sometimes these lures are also accidental, totally accidental. It doesn't have to be intentionally made by somebody to trap you, but they kind of come as suddenly few things attached to each other and you're kind of trapped by it, which was the case of the fox in the story of the fox in the very old, beautiful Panchatantra collection of Indian stories. I'm going to come back to it. Why corporal evil, or why evil located in the body is an older category of thought is interesting. because it's when I look at Orzola in The Little Mermaid, it's kind of a force of liberation from the kind of a structure that Ariel, the mermaid, is kind of caught in, that she's obsessed with becoming human, totally. She's, by the way, I would say she's like a version of Pinocchio, a kind of non-human who is betraying its kind of non-humanity and wants to become human. And Orzola, as a kind of a witch of the ocean, is for me a force of liberation and beauty and complexity. So she has in his lyrics kind of archive of different souls she has captured because they came to her and asked for favors. And so she's kind of a dirty, guilty, and a survivalist. She has survived the Poseidon, the god of the sea, with kind of asshole guy, loves order, kind of an ocean, beautiful organization. So she's kind of the opposite of that, and she's totally different promise of monster that I would say proposes. Crossing categories, that's what evil, for example, according to Ursula, does. Is the next performance started already? No? Okay. Yeah. This kind of evil that I'm kind of lured into is what I would also like follow it off in the very beautiful image of the, if you have seen medieval like cosmological like illustration, we have a planet and there's a snake kind of circling it. Have you seen the image? That there's a kind of a snake dragon like holding the whole planet Earth. I've seen it as in my encountered a lot. That's kind of a evil lizard that its other name is world encircler. That kind of creature, base materiality, and which we find it in a lot of narrations. For example, the Lithuanian fairy tale, the nine-headed snake. You know the story? In the fairy tales that there is a girl being chased by a nine-headed snake in the forest, and she kind of runs to a tree and climbs a tree, and the snake is kind of does what she does with the whole world, gets the tree, eating the bottom of the tree and trying to get the girl. Thanks God, the girl has 9 brothers, as a 9 celestial construction to ward off evil. So I would say that in this fairy tale, you probably know it by heart from your childhood. The 9 brothers are the sky gods, because we have also 9 constellations there. In Iran, which I'm from, the 9-headed snake is kind of used a lot in poetry, and it's kind of found itself in ghazal, which is some sort of love poetry, or kind of a way of describing your engagement with the world. And the 9-headed snake or dragon, I prefer snake by the way rather than dragon. Dragons too much brings confusion for me sometimes. Just a snake. So the snake is, some people say it's a replacement of material world. So what you do, you don't let yourself get caught with the 9-headed snake. I have a different proposal about this whole kind of 9-headed snake, not as a rhetorical device, but as a literal description of somebody's world. What if 9-headed snake was not a metaphor for the material base world, but it was somebody's world? Somebody was living in that kind of world, that it was 9-headed snake in it, or was part of that world. We don't know. But according to kind of little superficial research that I did on medieval or a pre-modern way of describing natural phenomena is that today we have a very important science, anatomical sciences, also involved in a lot of biological sciences, which it teaches us what constitutes the body of an animal or body, any kind of moving organism. That I know that a horse has 4 legs, for example. But if you forget anatomy for a moment, just erase it from your head, you end up yourself in exactly how in pre-modern time apparatuses of describing were infused completely one with the phenomena. So you would see something move fast, a horse with a rowing horse. You don't have a dead horse on your laboratory to count the legs. You are dealing with your perception. So you end up having this kind of many legs of this horse. So what if we are dealing with also a kind of a snake that is, its movement is not separated from its body? But that's also a proposal. I cannot really swear on my grave on it, but just to see what I do. Another person who was really obsessed with the snakes was Freud. Freud suggested that the history of morality basically is about when humans stood up. So basically, instead of being bended and kind of your nose being close to your ass, a lot of animals can do that. The nose and the asshole can meet. The whole human business was about this kind of uprightness to the sky, from the dirt and the shit and the bad smell of the ass into more like transcendental, like a business. So instead of looking down and smelling your shit, you could look up and you go higher. And Freud suggested that that's all about the business of moral being or morality, from that kind of shit to kind of more like celestial sky, the being better, being higher, standing up. So morality was for him exactly being erect, or being erected like us. Still, in fashion industry, being erect, looking like graceful, is all about that. You have never seen somebody smelling their ass in that kind of business. And what is the worst case within this image? Which animal not only smells its end, but can also eat it, is the snake. Horrifying when you see a snake. Have you seen it? Google it or not? It's a horrible image. Snake is eating its own tail. It really gives you the creep. It's really, I have no idea how to look at it. It's like strange, weird, terrifying, exciting, scary. But I would say that was exactly a kind of a lack of a gag reflex that Freud was mentioning, that you don't know what is going through here, that kind of very important area that you're not supposed to, like a lot of things shouldn't get in, especially your own end. So that was the kind of Freudian notion of dealing with human body, or the creatures who have a spine, by the way, which we are also interested in, the spined creatures. And snake, or as I was talking about it, which at some point, especially in the Persian culture, which I'm from, was kind of embodied everything evil. And so people got really obsessed with snakes as this kind of thing that gets around not only you, but the whole world. As also, if you go study medieval imageries, you see image holding the world. I'm not sure if it's protecting it or it's kind of holding it, or as in the case of Ursula in The Little Mermaid. Ursula, the witch of the ocean, maybe she was like the snake holding the cosmology of the ocean. We don't know the consequences that Ariel, the Little Mermaid, brought on the ocean by killing Ursula. We don't know the life after the sea witch death. How does it become? According to the story, it's all nice and plentiful and everybody's happy and singing, but we don't know that what ocean looks like without that powerful witch. So Ariel, the little mermaid, in her process of becoming human, kills Ursula, the witch, and by that he radically transformed the cosmology of the ocean. According to Norwegian kind of relation to natural disasters, it might have caused into creation of totally new monsters. So if we were in a kind of a post-industrial nuclear landscape of damage and destruction, the episode 2 of The Little Mermaid would be a kind of a sea monster, totally horrifying Godzilla kind of creature that would come as a result of erasing one of the most important components of the ocean cosmology, namely the evil octopus, which is very nice. I always liked her complexity and beauty. From that kind of evil, I would come to a tool that people kind of invented to turn away evil, or to kind of ward off, not to fight, just to ward off, just to like getting away out of the way, or like confusing it, or making momentarily a gesture that would go other way. These are the tools that I don't know, they call it apotropaic, fancy name. I'm not going to use it, but it's just a way of tricking the evil force or direction. One of these tools was like a stick, as a kind of it was used as a stick with like lines on it. I would say I really like the stick with lines because it was a mnemonic tool also. It was to ward off the evil of forgetfulness. So with the stick with like lines on it, you could kind of remember. And it was the fear of losing data, or the data loss in the many, I would say, ages ago, where like people inventing like counting and kind of building totems, sequences that would like count their tradition. By the way, tradition in Iran, I would call it, this is kind of my proposal. I should think about it maybe more. We have this like form of music, we call it radif. By the way, the music you might hear in the restaurant, one of the songs is Iranian, and the guy is singing on radif, which is by definition the most traditional thing you can find in Iranian music. I studied it for 10 years. It's really like scrubbing a stone. That's how you learn it. Scrub a stone and you learn the stone, your body changes because of it. It's really like calligraphy. You have to like practice, repeat. It's kind of interesting. It really helped me because I was into like painting and visual arts, which was all about exploding, epistemically tearing apart things, inventing new, taking things from your own ass and just playing around, explosiveness. And learning this kind of radif music really helped me to ground myself in something else that I thought, okay, this is something like works like a skill, not something that works with my like body and like going out into things, but more like things that come out as because of crafts. So it was like a craft thing that I was into. So radif literally means sequence. And my proposal is that tradition is exactly just a sequence, or any kind of sequence. If you look at totems, what they do is just make a sequence. What was after what came after what, and you have this kind of linear kind of order of things. One of the oldest texts that also we have is just a list of the name of the kings, which is crazy. It's very beautiful from Mesopotamia, and it actually was very helpful to discover a lot of things about Mesopotamian gods and kings. So lists were kind of really important. I'm really also into like lists. Also thinking about lists helped me to also understand my own tradition of radif, why people made these sequences, why they like this, and where is my chord in that sequence. Where do I put my thing in that sequential order? which is also very important. Tradition is not only a sequentiality that you memorize, but you find your also thing in that, which is also, we come back to it with the idea of heritage later. Yesterday we kind of opened up the idea of inheritance and heritage. I'm not going to go back into it, but tradition, I would say, is a little bit different than heritage. Tradition is kind of things that people have to answer to it again and again, so it became some kind of repeated answer, because singular answers to repeated questions, like how do I marry, how do I get water from the earth, how do I say hello, how do I meet somebody, how do I hate somebody, what enemies do, what is sisterhood, brotherhood, what is all these kind of things, repeated questions that kind of eventually people in particular locations have answers. Kind of traditions grow out of it. And as a modern kind of person, which I am, and child of enlightenment and educated in art, which is all about the break up or departure from tradition and normality. I also had to work a lot to become friend again with the idea of tradition, which is totally different relation with the idea of past. I think my head is twisted backward. I'm interested in the past in general, and I've also have a lot of problems and fights with my friends and colleagues. I'm working in Brussels right now with other artists. And they're constantly fighting. I say that orientation towards the future is kind of problematic and has own issues, and I like to look at the past. So as you see, it's all a question of also orientation, and it really matters how you're oriented. And so I work on the idea of the past, and everything I want to say is that past is not absolute. And I realized that because I'm also from West Asia or Middle East, and ask anybody from those regions, and they tell you how history is contested, and people have their own narration of or accounts of what happened. The whole Daesh and ISIS things about kind of totally different idea of what happened 1,000 years ago, when the Prophet looked that way or that direction, said this or that, choose that person after him, and that kind of stuff. So it really, people fighting for history and saying that this happened and not that, and it's at the end you cannot really kind of do anything about it. So if you go to Iran, for example, you're dealing with a lot of people who are very good at storytelling, and some people might call it bullshitting. My father was a very good bullshitter, by the way. He would, for example, tell stories at night to me, and he would just make it up. And it was this endless story of a boy who is supposed to fight a dragon, never happened, was never coming to the dragon. So when I was a child, I knew there was something wrong with the story, but I could never put my finger on it. And later I realized that he was just making it up. I mean, he could have told the story from a book, would have been nice also, but he was very comfortable with coming up with things. So that's kind of a thing also I see a lot in my Iranian friends, very comfortable with making up stuff. And also people who are kind of running the system in government in Iran, the people with the thing, with the mullah, the imam, whatever it's called, they're coming from the mosque where after the praying and namaz, the imam would come on the mimbar and would just tell stories to people. And the technique they use is rhetorical shifts, turning between Arabic into Farsi, mixing stories from different times, telling parables suddenly, singing in the middle of a speech and then pausing, creating all sorts of twists, gestures and jokes. So if you go to any mosque, if you pray with the imam, afterward you sit there, you see performance, 100% performance. Politically problematic. I know if you ask anybody, people are fighting against this kind of bullshit, but immediately when you leave Iran, when you live in a totally different context, you start to see how interesting that is actually. I think the other performance is starting, if I'm not wrong. If you have seen the girls, the nuns, you can go there if you like. I think it's starting right now. But we're going to continue with our snake, evil, animal body, and this kind of stories. So as I was saying about mnemonic tools, the tools are helping you to remember or to ward off the fear of data loss. I like to bring that idea to the notion of the devil and how in pre-modern times the devil played a very important kind of role in how people engaged with emerging ambiguities. So the question remains, how do you get married? Cinderella-wise, Cinderella-esque. Once upon a time, there was a mother. Okay, so we are talking about the larger context of knowledge. So let's practice a little bit of evil laughter. From Ursula, we see that the kind of is the laughter that comes from the bottom of the stomach. So to practice her evil laughter, you start from a very like a kind of a small laughter, and you bring the laughter a little high up. You let it enjoy yourself, like that's Ursula's in the Little Mermaid laughter. She laughs from her stomach. I love her, the way she laughs when she corrupts the mermaid. So, as I was saying about the context of evil, and also suggesting evil as a context, and also suggest a lot of other things also as context, like I would say past is a context, as well as history, and also in my research on medieval bestiaries, the nature itself was a context which you know and move in, and you orient and you navigate yourself. And yesterday we talked a lot about how you navigate yourself in damaged nature, ruins and things like that. So in a larger context of evil, I would like to propose the definition of a very old and nice collection of animal fables called Panchatantra, and as it was translated into Farsi, Arabic, and later lost, retranslated from memory, reconstituted, chewed, vomited 1,000 times, and lost again, translated, and ended up as a very important canon text when I was in school in Iran. So we studied it as a name, Kalila and Demna. It's the name of two shagal in the story, which the story is fantastic. One of the shagals is very ambitious, Machiavelli kind of personality type who wants to get into the business of the lions, the king, and wants to understand what is it doing, how do I enter the power system, I want to join the government and be a politician in the jungle and do things, not to be afraid. And the other shagol, which is a very kind of a modest and kind and satisfied with things as they are, advises him not to do that and just be happy with what you are. And he tells love stories. What's the problem with wanting too much or putting your hand when you're not supposed to? And as a response to that, the shagol, the Machiavelli shagol, brings another story, which is the story of a fox that one day in the forest, all the animals were like escaping from one direction to the other, running in fear from a very loud and scary sound. And the fox, as its foxiness, smart as swimming against the flow of the river, goes against exactly the opposite of direction where the animals are going, or evolutionary moving up the ladder. So he goes down the ladder or another direction in evolutionary. We don't know what kind of movement are there in the forest. According to Michel Serres, it's chaos, but I don't know. According to Panchatantra, it's like a flow, it's like a river. The animality is like a river, but I will come back to it. So the fox goes to the source of the sound, the horrible, scary sound, and you're imagine kind of a very like a dramatic scene with waves of sound coming to you, see anything, and you kind of, the fox have pause and put the paw in the source of the sound and realizes that it's just fat. It's a piece of animal skin attached to a tree, to a branch of a tree. With the wind, another branch is hitting it and making a very scary sound. So it tears apart, the fox. And in Farsi, it says something very nice. It can be translated as, which means it was just fat. So he comes up, he says this ending fate parable sentence at the end: louder it is, emptier it is. So something like that. So that's the Chagall says to the other Chagall to tell him that I'm on my way on my political career, and he kind of finds his way into the Lions kind of trustee group, and eventually becomes totally catastrophic. He brings the whole kingdom down. They get killed. Lion get killed, and the mother of the lion gets revenge. It's totally a bloody story, very similar to Macbeth, by the way, very uncannily similar to that, because the Chagall manages to kill the lion, the king of the forest, by making him jealous about a particular cow that he liked, apparently. So we have this multi-species, absolute failure kind of relationship going on in the old Indian fables. By the way, Panchatantra was written or collected from thousands of years old of animal fables that they used it, they collected it in a very nice book to teach young princesses, prince and princesses in the courts, the art of cunning and friendship, or trusting, or how do you work with your enemy, and this kind of stuff. So it's full of stories of trans-species failures, how the scorpion cannot work with the frog because the scorpion stings the frog and frog cannot live with that, how the rat cannot work with the pigeon cannot befriend with the human cannot befriend with the bear. Did you know the story of the human-bear relationship? Totally scary, horrible. You know the story? There was a human had a bear as a friend, and they were kind of hanging out a lot, going to cities and being really close to each other, hugging each other when they were sleeping. And people said that don't do this, guy, don't do this, dude, it's not good, it's inhuman, you're crossing boundaries. And one day the guy was asleep, and a fly was kind of bothering him and sat on his head, and the bear, being very nice and wants to kill the fly because his friend wants to sleep, takes a rock and smash the fly, hence this flattened head of the guy. Therefore, don't take a bear as your friend, or don't go there as when it comes to friendship and long-term relationships, especially with animals. But that's the Panchatantra or Kalila and Demna from many years ago. We have now like multi-species studies, companion species done a Harem way, and all of these people who are like really into the business of human and animal relationship, which is a totally different optimistic paradigm of like ecological entanglements between like us as people whose nose is not in our asses anymore, with other creatures who can smell their asses or their assholes. Some very nice place, by the way. I will come back to it later. But for now, regarding evil, according to Panchatantra, evil is convergent. Comes together naturally. You don't have to work for it. You don't have to create a campaign. You don't have to call people or set up meetings. Evil does it naturally. You know, in like Hollywood films, when thieves want to rob a bank, they don't have to like do a lot of the kind of organization. They come together and like everybody's clear. That's how evil is according to Panchatantra. But goodness needs work. You have to convince people, find a common language, work, create representatives, work with proxies, and like work across differences. Very time-consuming and exhausting. And that's how that's why, according to them, evil was very easy to come to. That's convergency. When things come together, it's also in social behavior. So it's how people do things. People want to do things together. Just come together. Which is also not really emergent nor contagion. That means like that's kind of thing when. So evil is not contagion, according to them. You don't become evil just by being a company of evil crowd. The crowd somehow hypnotically make you do things under its influence. That's contingency, by the way. And it's also not emergent. Evil doesn't emerge by itself from people coming together, and through the ambiguity of social relationships, new normativity comes that are not according to the normativity of the forest, but that's kind of evil. So it's also not like that. According to Panchatantra, again, the evil comes from the Chagall's misunderstanding of the what does it mean to be a good, nice, proper citizen of the forest. Another kind of idea of what's called the context of evil is the language itself. Many people in the modern times have kind of regarded language, aka literature or thinking pushed into syntax, as necessary evil, by the way. I really like necessary evil. I know that a lot of people don't talk about it, but I also see it as kind of a characteristic of an instrument used in ideological mystification. So you have to use like rhetoric and aesthetic to kind of bring people to the right place. And also as part of my own education as a leftist artist, resistant fighter, that kind of person, to not trust rhetoric and aesthetics. And it's very difficult for me to trust an object that it figures itself in a weird way. I'm also a little bit like the fox. I would just want to break up that which lures me. Nobody can trap me. I'm like free agent moving in the forest. I swim against the river and just break up the lure that animals are caught into. That's the mistake of the fox. He doesn't know how to get trapped. Everything depends on the way you allow yourself to be trapped by something. I will come back to it. I just want to map out my evil cosmology. Evil gaze, very interesting concept in Middle East, West Asia, probably other places. It's when you kind of a totally stranger looks at your achievement, and next day it's kind of turned into shit. You have something, you have an object, a very nice thing, you have claimed by accident or by labor, and somebody says, how nice. That's very nice shoes you're having. You have to offer your shoes instantly to them because you will lose your leg probably tomorrow. Evil gaze was especially something attributed to strangers. You find it also in a lot of African cities and countries. There's a very nice anthropological studies on evil eye in African context. I would recommend it. In the Iranian kind of a cosmology, a particular demon was associated and responsible for the evil eye, the evil gaze. It's all about how do you create an effect in a distance. So it's a pre-technological telecommunication world when things could happen in a distance by kind of intention and kind of use of what I call generally curse. We really love cursing. I wish we could curse again, and cursing was possible. And at the end of the Middle Ages, after the plague and the horrible Dark Ages where a lot of people like going through misery, beginning of the modernism, the witch trials are very like a witness of this moment when cursing became really like real and serious. And one of the moments in the history of European consciousness, the devil was the most real thing. And there was no other time that devil was so much real than around the 16th century, the beginning of modernism. And it was a moment that a lot of people were attuned to the idea of the spectre, or that thing which appears and scheme of textual unreality looms over people. There was you are like really having a bad year, everything is kind of falling apart, hunger and this kind of stuff. And devil proposed something to you and you say yes, kind of thing, and then you are kind of in trouble later because everybody was became a little bit jumpy. That also what's happened with the trial, witch craze and witch hunting and this kind of stuff. By the way, a lot of women was very involved in the hunt or accusation. It was not a kind of anti-women movement. It was also women against women. And guess who is closer than everybody else to the forces or the influence of nature? It was the women. That was why they were most suspicious. It was very dangerous to be a woman in the 16th century, especially if you're very old and a little bit like down by force of the ages, or you were very young and very handsome and pretty. There was these two ages that was very tricky because if you were young, you could have been really under the influence of devil, mostly or most likely because you were young and pretty. And if you were very old, you could have also been suspected as a witch very much, but the best place to be was probably in your 40s or most respectively, let's say. And it was also very like the time like wicked little sorceries got their kind of come up as like something. People got jumpy, and that moment suddenly get people charged into a half-known intensity, and ordinary people like really got into it, and roads get paved by that into. And it came a lot from regional places, you know? And it's that kind of vortex that pulled a lot of people into particular forms and to align into something that came to be a hunt, or let's go after them. So this kind of the idea of these wicked little things as a mode of attunement, I would say, is something that marks all sort of excess in the Middle Ages, also in the early modernism. Astrology, fortune telling, and the specters, the sorceries, and the ghosts and spirits, and all these kind of things. My definition of ghosts is a sign of reason's failure. And when I say reason, I mean that which arises from to transcend the kind of being that would live only in the mode of accidental. So it's all about accidentality and the river of animal subjectivity movement, all the randomness, and that which transcends itself from the accidental pool of events is reason. Have nothing to do with modern rational mind and thinking. That's a kind of a reason, very general way I'm talking about, and it's a particular labor that wants to designate the source of menace. You know menace in English? When something horrifying and bad kind of lurking from the horizon, it's really embodied feeling of evil. Something menacing coming up. Before the Second World War, Jung had a dream that dark clouds are emerging from the horizon. Menace. Totally, he saw the Second World War coming years before that in his dream, in his archetypal, of course, dream. So that's kind of a source of menace that the reason is busy with. And what kind of source is that? That's kind of that exceeds any kind of empirical explanation, that kind of failure actually. So it's very nice and very rich kind of failure in finding what is the source, what is the cause or causality. So we're dealing with all sorts of seeking or actually genuine desires for causality in witch burning actually. Two very nice anthropologists, the very young guys, did a recent research actually studying what people were doing during the accusation, what kind of tools they used to gain knowledge, who is which and who is not. And it turns out to be there was a very experimental crisis of knowledge, and the accusators, the people who were busy with torturing and burning and putting people in the water and taking nails, they were interested in knowledge. They really wanted to know the cause. The problem was that the devil was involved in the whole this business, and he and the people more close to the devil were unfortunate to be questioned by that apparatus. And so there's a very kind of a mode of experimental knowledge production that we find in the witch hunts. It's a very difficult place to visit. A lot of people were also kind of very not lucky to be questioned in that kind of world. Also some men, a lot of women, as I said. And witch hunts, so actually I didn't want to talk about witch hunts. I just want to talk about the specters. What does it mean to attune to something ghost-like that kind of emerges as a jumpy intensity that you get caught up into? It's all about attunement, and as I said earlier, also about orientation. Not, as I said, in the case of Panchatantra or the Demna, it's not only an orientational parable that cognitively puts you in some direction, but emotionally you cut into a very powerful, momentarily regional thing that puts you in alignment, and you are sure that your neighbor has done things with devil last night, and you kind of also you are not sure if you yourself has said yes to the snare of the devil last night. So it's kind of a very difficult to explore area, and also very tricky not to politicize it. It's also what makes it interesting because it's really edgy as a topic. But another kind of, in the context of evil, as I'm kind of trying to paint it, talked about the evil game, the Panchatantra, the language, the necessary evil. I want to also bring one little other thing. In Islam, in Quran, the holy book of the Muslims, one of the things that the God, the Allah, is very jealous about are the friends. So totally different relationship to friendship. Again, we have from Panchatantra to the Quran, the Islamic book, that we find again and again that Allah is advising its subjects, be careful with your friends because they're the ones who will bring you to evil. Not the devil, not the kind of a whisper with that kind of thing, but is the friend. So if you search the word evil friend, it comes many times in Quran actually. And it turns out to be Allah didn't want pious Muslims to have so much friends. The friends get too close to each other, it kind of brings you to do things together. You might end up doing things that if you were alone and by your own consciousness might not have, but the friends do that. It also tells us what were the Arabic Peninsula was dealing with, what kind of social relationship they were having. Friendship was very strong between the people there. And Allah or God's jealousy regarding the friends could be a witness of this, but I cannot really say that for sure. I'm actually not sure about that, it's just a speculation. So we have the monopoly of the evil later in Muslim kind of thought as when it comes to the idea of devil. In the Iranian kind of mysticism, are you into mysticism, by the way? I was really into like mystic reading text from Middle Ages when I was younger. I'm not sure about your context of mysticism. I'd like to know more. Come to me later. I'm not sure if it's also a topic for you. But it's somewhere in the Middle Ages in Iran, the devil, in mystic literature, becomes a kind of a hero character. It was also a kind of a gesture from the mystics that was very already advanced by the 6th century, that to kind of go against another kind of open another dimension regarding the textual richness of the Islam at that time. So the devil becomes a kind of not a kind of agent of evil, that's kind of a clear-cut character that you know exactly what is his business and what is his sound like and what does he wants, and you can recognize it. But it became kind of a very interesting actor in conversations with the people who were on trance, on intoxication, going to like transcendental exterior dimensions to explore their thing. And the devil is kind of an interlocutor, a partner in dialogue, and it enters a lot of conversation and people start to sympathize with the devil. It was kind of a textual maneuver on the side of the Muslim mystic thought. By the way, I want this one little definition I give. It turns out, after the 2nd century Islam, people were not feeling enough their religion. Because also, as you know, Islam is also very kind of a military origin. It's very organizational. It's not about how you feel, about how you secure your afterlife and like how do you like deal with material life to be a good, clean person. So as it spread after the 2nd century, a lot of other people were kind of forced or like recruited or inspired to be a Muslim. That kind of in the West, South, and Central Asia, and a lot of people were lacking feeling their religion. So according to some, I don't know, legend or studies, it was the Egyptian slaves who introduced mysticism into the Islam. In the 2nd century, Zunnun Masri, very important guy in the history of Iranian tasawwuf, we call it mysticism, that through the processes of his own bodily transformation as a slave from Egypt to the Arabic Peninsula, he kind of managed to transform all of that into cognition, and later into that was appropriated and was brought into mysticism. And his mode of kind of feeling the divine was through pain, basically. They say that he would go to a cave for a year. He would come out of the cave one day, only one day, and go back to the cave again. Very kind of excessive type of guy, very inspiring for a lot of people. People would gather around the cave to just want that of a year for him to come out just to see. And many years later, of course, pain as one of the important modalities of feeling religion has changed. If you know Rumi, the poet, you know Rumi, the the Iranian famous poet, celebrated also a lot in Turkey, doesn't matter. So his mysticism is not meaningful at all. His whole version of it is based on something else, which is love. Don't want to talk about it. Love is not the topic. Evil is, so I would stay with Zanun a little bit. So, as I was saying, this whole concept and the context that I laid out tonight about the evil was to come to an idea of a 9-headed snake that is chasing a little girl in the forest. And the girl climbs a tree and the snake is kind of eating the tree, and the girl calls in her 9 brothers. And the brothers, one by one, are responsible for cutting each head of the snake. And that's the ending. It doesn't not so much interest me, but being chased by a 9-headed snake is very specific. And I would love to be chased by a 9-headed snake. Maybe not. If you see a snake, you will. I mean, once in a city, I was in Vienna. I saw a snake in the city. It really marks your head perception. If you see a snake, you have to tell somebody. It's impossible. Later you will find somebody and you tell them, I saw a snake today. It's one of those things that when you kind of encounter as a human, really marks your perception. It becomes a burden and becomes a reason for telling. And that's kind of a very nice way of kind of starting the whole business of storytelling, that you have seen something that you have to tell somebody about it. And it turns out what you have seen could be totally apparitional. It doesn't have to be, you have not to be sure anymore. All you need is precision. You just have to be precise. And you swear to God you have seen that 9-headed dragon, you're sure about it, and kind of tell it, and the more you tell it, then it becomes more precise and kind of you get into it. And then it has its own life, and it goes through its own kind of trajectory and has its 9-headedness, grows, other people love it, they take it, centuries by, it enters, becomes a literature, children has to learn it. The 9-headed dragon becomes the metaphor replacement for the world itself. And we have the 9-headed dragon in the literature in Iran, Greek, or of other countries as the world circular, that which circles around the world, that which you descend, that you shouldn't descend, that which you have to transcend from the snake. The snake, the one who doesn't have a gag reflex, can eat its own tail. A horrible kind of moment if you have seen a snake eating its own snake. According to Freud, the whole human morality is based on turning your head from between your legs, where you can smell your own asshole, upward. So the spine becomes erect, and that's the whole human morality as it starts in the body, in the spine, that cannot smell its own asshole anymore. The human is detached from its own shit, and it can now is busy with higher things in moralities, can look at the sky and the sun, the gods, and this kind of stuff. So the opposite, for Freud, the complete opposite of that kind of civilization in human history was the snake itself. Of course, I'm making that up. I never said that. But that's very nice for me to also understand Freud's construction of human psychology based on corporality. And that's where, with the whole idea of the 9-headed dragon, I want to come to the idea that I proposed as a metaphor. I think the 9-headed snake was not a metaphor. Metaphoric, like a rhetoric expert, rhetoricians, whatever, they called it as a replacement for what the people want to point to as a world. I said that, what if somebody's world was 9-headed snake? just consider that, and things I would say becomes a bit more interesting. It's a very something exercise I do, taking things literally, and very interesting happens. If you see, by the way, a lot of like new animations in the entertainment industry, it's all coming from literalization of stuff. If you have seen, I don't know, like Rick and Morty and this kind of animations, it's all about literally visualizing stuff that we use regularly, figuratively in language. So it's a kind of a tool in a lot of business and fiction making and Hollywood and this kind of animation or moving pictures that entertain us. It's a very particular tool. I didn't learn it in my art education. All my art education was in painting and drawing, was about the coordination of hand and the eye. Very important, by the way, but it was not about storytelling. It was about developing a mimetic sensibility. How do I relate with my eye and hand to the world with a line and that kind of things. Metaphors metaphor is a play between tension and polarity, I would say. My proposal is that to understand that kind of figurative language as we have in the metaphor as a form of distancing, actually. What if using metaphoric language was to distance the speaker from something that was very heated and charged experience, and through distancing you could have explored it now. So I would say the origin of like human creation of like language and metaphors, people wanted to distance themselves from direct experience, and hence language was very good. So language played as a necessary evil, as I explained earlier, as a very kind of as a whale, as something that comes between two things, but a very good way for some people. For sometimes it can also become annoying and on your way, but it has its own way of way. But the metaphors became very useful as an act of inquiry, your perception, and it has nothing to do with that which was already known. If we were dealing with the already known, we didn't have to use metaphoric languages. And when people, including myself, use figurative languages like metaphors and parables, as I was talking about, it is about I cannot prove something, but I can feel the power of its result. You feel what are the consequences of something, and you're not able to prove it. And it seems like metaphors are very handy to do that. And also, they could be completely bullshit and used in political projects to idealize mystification of tools, and you should be very careful when people use metaphor and parables and fables and things like that. But at the same time, it's you should be very advanced already to be able to trust those kind of figures, because they're not figured in a way that they clearly propose themselves as trustworthy. It's a realm of static, realm of illusion, hallucination, forms that they are not directly what they are, that kind of stuff. So how in the Lithuanian fairy tale, the girl who's running from the nine-headed dragon and kind of calls her 9 brothers, what other ways of engagement from her side with nine-headed dragon? Another girl who was also dealing with horrible stuff is Scheherazade from the 1001 Nights story. She's not only caught by the monster, but she's kind of in the chamber harem of the monster. Her case is a very cruel prince, a serial killer, misogynist, psychopath king prince who is killing women every night. And the Scheherazade from who knows the 1001 Nights story, that's great. So if you know, Scheherazade kind of opens the whole story by saving women every night, by telling the story to the cruel prince, and by creating a very elaborate, suspenseful narration every night, keeps the prince wanting more. So her issue is all about delay. How do you create a delay? Because according to 1001 Night, if you just delay a little bit, and you manage to delay a little bit more, mutation can happen. You might end up to marry the cruel prince, and she manages to do that. She totally changes the affect of the cruel prince. So in the beginning of the story, he's totally raged and blind by anger, the killing machine, and by the end of the story, her heart has changed. And how she does it, not by defiance and transformation, not by revolution, but she does it very slowly. What Scheherazade does in the 1001 is only very simple thing she does. She changes the tempo of the cruel prince. That's all she does. She changes the rhythm. This is also what Kafka recognizes in the juridical systems. Kafka saw the whole modern organization of human system as, he called it the law or the system, as a labyrinthine structure. As you know, Kafka was a thinker of bureaucracy and trials and tests and calls and waiters and walls. And so he thought that the whole construction of labyrinth, which by examples how bureaucracy works, was a civilizational structure. You are passion, you are a monster, you are a wolf, you enter the three little pigs' house, but you have to go through labyrinth. You go through you have to wait, you have to delay. And by the time you go through all the maze of the labyrinth, you enter where you can finally express your complaint. You are cool, you are civilized, you are calm, you're not a wild wolf that came from the forest with your harsh directional vector. You learn to wait. And also, if you are a parent, you know that all the most important thing you can teach your child is waiting, to postponing of the gratification. So it's really important thing that the wolf in the story of the three little pigs have to learn. Also, Scheherazade manages to do that. It takes her 3.5 years actually. It's not an easy process. She's raped every night, so it's not easy at all. And she even has children. By the end of the story, she already has 2 children with the prince. And so she's kind of a departure also from Kafka, as Scheherazade is also a master labyrinth builder. But her story, not the story of the let's bring down the prince, we have to change the system so there's no cruel prince is possible, down with despotism, let's change the political system, as is the case of Antigone, but she's from a side of defeat and retreat. And also, she's not seductive, she's not persuading the prince, she's not fooling him at all. All she does is delaying, and all she does is changing the rhythm, little by little by little. It's a very totally different kind of impulse of politics. So I would say it's a non-agonistic impulse of politics, and it's a very kind of I'll call it a socially progressive way of working under terror. This is a totally different dimension of political approach to the world, as the case of Antigone. If you know the Antigone from Greek tragedy, she's a kind of a model of a spectacular, defiant voice in politics, saying no to the cruel guy who will not allow her to mourn bury her brother. And she's kind of celebrated in political and philosophical thought. And also, French Revolution is all Antigone, by the way. That way of saying no to the ordinary, not to descend to the ordinary, but to break it. I myself, as a child of kind of art leftist tradition of like being and thinking. I'm also made in the image of that kind of work. Agonism, with which is about, you say, you come into you become active in the act of resistance. You say no to the bad object. Scheherazade is a totally different impulse that is also part of my heritage, and I would also, Antigone is also my heritage, all of that. And so it's a very kind of a difficult place to inhabit with Scheherazade. Harem is a very kind of a weird, difficult place to be as a anti-feminist place where women are kind of sex slave and that sort of thing. And yes, and another girl in the harem, which is very important, is...
It was so good. That's the production part, and that's really important because it's the last performance. It's at time, and it's not probably together.
A very white dream that the phantom limb has. I was wondering what could be the dream of a phantom limb itself? How would a phantom limb would dream actually? And how weird is that kind of idea? So, as I was talking about the stone of measurement and the history of metaphors in set of cultures that we are interested in, I came to the idea of the parable of the 12 camels, to kind of look at the heritage, or what is it to inherit, the idea of inheritance. So the story of the 12 camel goes like this, that there was a very nice old guy who was at his deathbed, asked his 3 sons to talk to them, and he tells them that I haven't gained so much in life, I have only 11 camels. To my first son, I give you half of the camels. To my second son, I give you 1/4, and the third 1/6 of the camels. And dies. The sons, perplexed, troubled by this impossible division of camels, they don't know what to do with 11 camels, how to divide them between themselves, as the father asked. So they go to the neighboring village, and they ask another old friend of their father's, what do we do with these camels? How do we divide them? The guy completely also no idea, ahnungslos, how do we divide these camels, tells them, I don't know how to solve your problem, but I have a camel. You can have the camel, and maybe it helps you. So apparently it does. It becomes 12 camels, half of it is 6, 1/4 is 3, and 1/6 is 2. And 1 camel remaining, they return it to the guy from the other village. I have no idea where the origin of this parable is, but kind of it opens for me very important dimensions of inheritance. First is that why the son actually receives the camel as they do. They don't need the camel, they didn't ask for it, they have their own like Ferrari cars, work with engines, and their life doesn't count for having camels. They're not interested in the camels, and for some reason they decide to keep the camels. They could have, if it was me, I would have said, okay, where's the next immediate shop, we can sell it and get rid of it. So the first dimension of inheritance is obligation. For some reason, the sons are in a position of obligation. They cannot throw away the camels, they cannot sell them or kill them or cut them. They have to solve the form that the riddle comes as a riddle to them from their dead father. And the second dimension is that it's something that needs work, and it's an impossible reading of the riddle. So heritage is not always something horrifying or something like a piece of gold, but it's something that from the side of the inheritor needs figuring out, and it comes as something very impossible and weird and fucked up, and it's definitely not something you ask for. Sometimes it's just a nice piece of text, sometimes it's a whole religion that you're inheriting, sometimes it's a political system, sometimes a horrible forefather or a grandmother's curse, as is the case of a lot of fairy tales in Lithuania. I don't know what's wrong with the grandmothers, that they curse their grandchildren so much, but my own grandparents were for some reason not so kind. I don't know. We didn't have an intimate relation. My grandfather was, as I remember him, he was attached to all sorts of medical devices. I saw him always as somebody who has tubes around him coming, a little bit scary for me. And his voice was also involved with all sorts of mechanical weird things, a little bit scary when I was a child. But anyway, so this kind of figuring out what to do with the riddles, the second dimension according to the parable. The third one I would say, which is also for me very important, is that they have to go to the other village to figure it out. They cannot solve it where they are. So to solve that kind of riddle, to figure out your heritage, you have to go to the far end. You cannot do it at your country. You have to go somewhere else. Ask that anyone with a migratory background, and they will agree with that. So you work out what is your heritage somewhere else. That's kind of it's a parable, okay? Could be totally wrong, but I kind of like the idea. And concept, so according to the story, also it demands a lot of transformation. It's not something you receive passively, something you pass on as a receptive position, but it's a transformative position. You tell stories, you change it, you transform it. You don't face it, you're not against it, as it was the case of Hamlet, as I was talking about, with what his father asked him to, but it's something you start from. So according to the parable, you could have done much better with what Hamlet's father asked him to do. That kind of weird thing, he asked him, kill your uncle, revenge me. So I would say the parable of the camels also could be helpful for Hamlet to solve what was his heritage. His heritage was murder. He had to kill. It's a little bit more difficult than the sons in this case of this story. So as you can see, I'm very interested in heritage and inheritance, and I wonder if there's anybody who doesn't feel that has some sort of heritage who come into it. I don't know. I always felt myself in my life that I'm kind of detached with my ancestors because of the particular contemporary history of Iran. Somehow my parents didn't end up connecting me to their parents, or in terms of stories, sensibilities, anxieties, fears, all sorts of things. So I really never felt kind of having an ancestor in that sense. But at the same time, I find myself a lot of time in the position of the sons, figuring out something that I cannot stop thinking about, something that I'm responding to. And my proposal is that if there's something that you're responding to, how you feel like I have to respond to this, that's your heritage. Whatever it is, it could be this chocolate that you think you have to think about. It could be a complex text from the past, or a despotic, horrible figure that you have to think about if you're German, this kind of stuff. And if you are in that position, you have heritage. You're dealing with inheritance. And a lot of things that I thought they were just hanging out as annoying things, they turned out to be my heritage. One of the very nice things that turned out to be my heritage was the whole business of Islam. I grew up in Iran, which is a Muslim majority country, and like me, like in the case of many Iranians, Islam is not their identity, it's not your identity, it's your heritage. It's a totally different relationship to this. Also, like, it's also never kind of a turn on and off thing that either you are or not. So it's a form of a tattoo on your body that you, with the help of the others who don't have that kind of tattoo, you learn to read. And it's something that I would call this the unreadability of it, that this makes it beginning of kind of a work that you like to do. So that makes the whole business of heritage and inheriting very interesting for me, that needs transformation and translation. Translation is kind of the name of the game, basically. That's what you do. So as you see in the case of the camels, inheritance is experience of being tied to a very long string. You don't know where the end of the string tied to, but it's tied to somewhere. And so you're not a free-floating subject. You're not a neoliberal individual piercing the space-time as gaze in the case of Hollywood animated films. You're tied. You're tied to somewhere. And thanks God that you are tied to somewhere, that you're not free-floating. That's what makes actually, through that inheriting, that kind of being tied to something, you find yourself maybe being constructed. You become yourself. It's also for me, was a very interesting experience of what Deleuze might come becoming. For me, it's very concrete. Was that idea of learning to read your burdenness, that kind of, or reading your own heritage. So the gesture, in the carrying of the gesture of heritage, and it's all sort of, it has nothing to do, you don't have to go crazy with, like Hamlet did with his heritage. It could be all sorts of fabulations and playfulness and jokes and gestures involved. And as you can see here, it is super constructed, like the case of the camels. It's boom, 11 camels clear, and it's kind of, there's numberables, and it is constantly transformed. It's a retroactive thing, It's not something that Apple invents. It's something that constantly wants to go back to something. So it's exactly what makes it, again, capable of responding to, because of this kind of quality that it has. I really like the word retroactive. It's a very kind of a negative thing. Actually, things want to go back to their previous form. That's also one of the qualities of inherited things, which makes them variable and challenging to work with. I would contrast heritage with something else I would call transposition. As you know, to transport something is you take something, go from somewhere else, and transpose means that posing is this, and then when you transpose, is a promise of going from this position to another position with the promise that not being attached to the original position. And if you know, in the case of trans, as it's used in a lot of gender identity issues, it's all about that you change without being attached to the previous state. And it's a very kind of important things in our time to be able to cross without holding tightly to locations that you're moving from. Ask that anyone who is having a nomadic or trajectory life and is kind of dealing with by force or by will from displacement. Trans is also a very interesting experience that we are dealing with, and that's why exactly make me think about heritage being bound as being tied, not being a free-floating personality. And exactly that also wants to bring out the idea of fabulation. And to fabulate is also a very popular term these days, also very difficult. It can be used all sorts of ways. I would personally contrast to fabulate with fiction, because fiction is something people design. It's a very design thing. But fabulation is what just people make on their way from their life. And the business of storytelling, I would say, to fabulate is, for me, is all about to give the past a different kind of present. So it's not about to think about the future, it's actually thinking about the past. That's where I like to orient fabulative, speculative forces, is about the past. And that also makes me somebody who is kind of oriented towards the past. And it's also different than remembering, and different than remembering, collecting, and composing things. It's a very kind of different kind of thing. It's similar to what you do with the camels you didn't ask for. You fabulate, you start thinking and working with them. What do we do with the heritage of zoology. It's kind of what I was busy with in the last 5 years. It turns out that a lot of things has changed the way we think about human-animal life since the 16th century. But there's a lot of very nice things about the heritage of zoology, because there was a time when people were writing bestiaries, very nice, rich collection of anything strange, like anything bizarre with 2 heads or 6 legs, 9 tails, and like something weird, a very strange sound in the forest, a volcano that exploded, and like its sound was echoing around the earth 3 times for many decades. And that kind of stuff was proliferating in the Middle Ages with the working of bestiaries. And that kind of work was totally different than the way modern natural sciences is, because something happened with the 17th century. People, instead of being obsessed and engaged with irregularities of nature, they become interested in the regularities, in the repeated patterns, aka the modern sciences. How, like, what is the commonality, what is the cause behind something, not the monstrosity or what that makes something weird and strange and different. But it's a very kind of exciting time in the Middle Ages that people were really in love with like twisted eclipses, babies with 2 heads, and rumors were kind of coming about the natural world as like intensities that we just get attached to, and people really like to write about them and write about them. I call the bestiaries as rumors of animals, and much more into them than just being 100% sure about this or that animal. So if you are in the Middle Ages, my proposal about the whole practice, you know, the bestiaries, what are they exactly? Like, actually come as books, very thick books, list of bizarre things: stones, sky, angels, God, snakes, different sort of clouds, also totally categories that are absolutely out now. Like one of the nicest categories in all bestiaries is darkness. So darkness is itself a natural category. One of the also very nice categories is the devil itself. The devil was very much part of the natural order. It was not unnatural. Devil was the natural, and it was also part of the death and the technologies of death, that kind of stuff. So people were really seeing those things as a part of a whole connected cosmology. One of the most difficult parts of bestiaries is the chapter about women. The most difficult one to read now, because it radically stands against a lot of values that kind of we like and stands for. So also makes it one of the most interesting parts. How the hell do you take that heritage, that without throwing it away, without erasing it with my kind of education in feminist theory, how can I become available to that very troubled, weird stories that come there? And so it has a chance, actually. And why do I want it to have a chance, actually, to say that, throw it away? I'm not sure, perhaps because I feel like it's heritage, or maybe I just like that. Maybe that's it. I cannot say more than that. So the whole thing about bestiaries was about kind of taking the natural phenomena, or what that which appears to the senses, and not separating it from the storytelling tools. So you would not investigate, as I'm used to, detective kind of mentality to find out what is behind the story, what is that. I would take the story as the thing itself. Somebody felt with certainty a shadow in somewhere many years ago that was reported by somebody else that was following it at the dead of night and showed it some weird treasures hidden, and this shadow was very much talking and alive, and it had a name and it had intention. And somebody also, yes, I also affirmed that, someone said, and then that's enough. You write about it, and you kind of also continue. So I would say the word, the bestiaries in the Middle Ages were actually, my theory can prove it, origin like kind of an early proto-horror, genre of horror. They were made to make your hair grow. Imagine a child in the 12th century, you are kind of opening the book of bestiaries, reading about like some horrific serial killer creature who collects bones of its victims somewhere far, far, far away, and really gives you the creeps, and also enlarges your world as something that can kill you, dangerous, and it's not just something that your master can get rid of, but it's also a world that is not mastered yet. So it's a very interesting time to work with it. For some reason, I also kind of got attached to it, got bound with my own string to the work of bestiaries. And it turns out to be rich enough to be busy with it for the last 6 years, actually. And I opened kind of a lot of things with bestiaries. How do we look at the past? What do we do with the engagement of animals in human writing? How do animals engage in text, basically? And what is the whole story of modernism, transformation of knowledge, and most importantly, classification? Bestiaries are all about classifying stuff. And the kind of what they use, one of the most very much interesting techniques they use that I see sometimes in popular culture, lists and narratives are very nicely engaged together. To make a list was the number one technique of writing bestiaries. You have to write a coherent narrative or an arc from the beginning to end. You make a list, and it seems like you can start from a list onward, but somehow the whole collection that you don't know everything, but you know it's a list, give you a sense of the cosmology, that you are part of a kind of a listed, categorized kind of world that is full of things that are not mastered, and also full of small narratives. So a lot of the stories of the Bestia starts with it is said that, or it is wondrous to say, or it's miraculous to say, or I heard Abdullah Hassan said that in the regions of Maghreb there is a creature who gives birth at morning, dies in the noon, the child grows by night, gives birth again the next day, it dies. I swear to God, he swore to God that this creature existed, and he saw it, and a lot of people saw it. And who knows what that kind of being is? Continuity, temporality, horror, cycles of life, short cycle life kind of thing. And maybe it was a human, maybe it wasn't, but that's the kind of a thing, that's a kind of a style of a storyteller. And it turns out a lot of animals have a lot of heads and legs, more than usual. I have my own proposal why it was like that, but maybe I'll talk about it tomorrow. Thank you very much. I really have to pee. I've been talking for the last 3 hours. Enjoy. Let's go to the restaurant and devour. Merci.